Yeah, and Secretary, thank you very much for selecting me for this presentation. And let me to run within 15 minutes what I did about within 3 years of time. Our title is today the migration as a stimulant. So migration is very important thing in today's world. So this is my outline. I'm not going to read all. Just we know, under the natural law in the world, there are two special characteristics. One is the change, the other one is the diversification. So change and diversification happening in everywhere. So it is very much applicable to the migration. So if you see the global migration, what's happening in recent past? From the 1987 to 2017, within 2 decades of time, total migration in the globe has doubled, which is from 123 million to 250 million people have migrated in last 2 decades. So it's a huge amount of people are moving on the world. So that is the important character, one of the important characters of the migration. The second is, of course, structural change. Some countries, particularly growing proportion of the migrant people as their total population. So even in the many countries you can see their foreign-born population share has been growing into a larger extent. And particularly if you see the United States of America, what's happening at the beginning, it has been growing one space, but now you can see around 50 million people who are born in other countries. It is expected to increase for 80 million people coming to US in coming recent decades. So therefore, the US, you know, the Trump's major policy when he come to election was that about the migration. Now they are struggling to border control with the Mexico by making the wall. It is a huge cost. On the other hand, we can see particularly the countries which are having the foreign-born population share, you can see the highest population share in the cities. If you take the Toronto, the 47% people are foreign-born people, and Melbourne and the Sydney is the second. The 45% of people are foreign-born population. So this is the global situation. We can see the cities are growing with the foreign-born people in those cities. An interesting nature of that, they are doing multiple activities, not only the labor migration. We have been talking only about the labor migration from Sri Lanka. The migration is a diversified thing today, so I will come to that point later. So this is the literature review. You can see in economics literature, the neoclassical, there is macro explanation, how people migrate. Of course, the micro level, people take the decision based on their economic returns after the migration. And of course, new economic theory tells us it's a household maximization. Everybody share the cost of migration, and after migration, they will reimburse it or something like that. I'm not going to elaborate all the theories, but recent past, you see, with the diversification, the most important theory is coming as network theory, institutional theory, and the cumulative causation theory. So these are somewhat relevant to management aspect of migration, where the networking and the other part of immigrant entrepreneurship coming to the discussion with these new models. Anyway, the benefits of labor migration, and people talk about the remittances. That private remittances has been about main source of the foreign exchange earnings, particularly in Sri Lanka, 10% of GDP, and it was helpful to reduce the unemployment rate. Actually, 25% of Sri Lankan labor force are now in the outside of the country. It is estimated that about more than 3 million Sri Lankans out of the country. If you just type the Sri Lankan diaspora in internet, you can see each country, the migration statistics have given by their countries, so that Sri Lankan diaspora, if you have the sum of all this, it's exceeding 3 million Sri Lankans living out of the country. So therefore we are getting this kind of benefit We know that about 6 billion or 7 billion US dollars we are getting every year as the remittances. But with respect to the benefits of migration globally, we can see that some countries getting huge benefit. Like India, India's total amount of remittances is about 70 billion US dollars, which is close to our GDP value. And then we can see the other countries like China, 64 billion US dollars. So annually getting as from the overseas people. And there are some other countries also. The importance of remittances to these countries we have to highlight. On the other hand, particularly Sri Lanka, what has been happening in recent past with respect to migration? The number of people migrating has come down slightly. That last year, 262,000 people migrated as registered migrants from the Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment. But in recent years, you can see migration has come down in Sri Lanka. So the people going abroad has come down. That trend we have to observe with the reasons why people have come down to migration. That we know end of the civil war and restrictions in Middle East countries and increasing domestic demand, labor construction sector has one opportunity. Government policy is also discouraging kind of course there is a national plan on discouraging unskilled workers migration from Sri Lanka. Then the informal sector expansion, particularly maybe use of three-wheeler, maybe the working as a three-wheel driver may be beneficial rather than going to Middle East country. So, and the declining oil prices in the world market make the constraints on the Middle East countries. With respect to Sri Lanka, I think one of the most neglected important component of the remittances is the definition. Because we always go behind the dollars, but there is more than dollars within the remittances. You can see a social nature such as the ideas, behavior, identities, social capital, knowledge we have to get from the overseas Sri Lankans. Actually, you know the role played by overseas Indians for development of India today, the role played by overseas Chinese for development of China is not playing the overseas Sri Lankans for Sri Lanka. I think overseas Sri Lankans we have to touch not only for the dollars but for market taxes, information, and the lot of connectivity, and particularly networking is essential thing where we have forgotten in the migration analysis in Sri Lankan literature. So particularly the South Asian countries, you can see how much the remittances have grown in recent past. That is the highest source of revenue coming from if you compare with the FDI and with respect to this remittances and ODA, the remittances is the main source of money coming from other countries. And what about the Sri Lankan situation? So if you see the Sri Lankan situation in recent past, as I told you, it has been growing, but it has come to a certain level of stagnated amount at the 7 billion US dollars. So these two lines where we can see it's a kind of a period where we got higher growth of the remittances, and it has of course stagnated now. So we need to see how we can get these remittances as in future, not only just worker remittances. My suggestion is we have to touch the Sri Lankan entrepreneurs in other countries. So how do we inculcate entrepreneurial culture for overseas Sri Lankans, and how their role for the Sri Lankan growth is very important. With respect to that, I have been in Japan, you know, many years, so I have started doing some research on migration and the entrepreneurship. There, of course, we can see the emerging trends of the two emerging trends of Sri Lankan migration I have seen. One is the growing number of students. In 2017, 3,000 Sri Lankan students went to Japan for learning language and the education purposes. 2017, according to immigration data, 3,000 Sri Lankan students went to Japan. So earlier, actually, no one going to Japan in 1980s for education purposes, particularly learning language. I'm referring to people at the age of 18, 19, 20s. So this impact will come in future as one of the important impact of migration, the student migration. The second is the growing Sri Lankan diaspora in other countries have led to increase Sri Lankan immigrant entrepreneurs in other countries. So these immigrant entrepreneurs and student migration make diversity, and which we have to capitalize in the particularly the policy formulation, and in future, instead of we are talking about, this is the global student migration. You can see in 2016, it's over 4 million, it's close to 5 million foreign students migrating to other countries. Now, many countries, they have started education as the business, so therefore many students are migrating, particularly Sri Lankans. We know that within the age group of 19 to 23% of Sri Lankans, only 7 students enter into public universities in Sri Lanka. So that 92% people from age 19 to 23, that they are seeking education more, but that opportunity is not available. So that may be one reason even Sri Lankan students are also going abroad. So in the meantime, the foreigners living in Japan, I will take my research site into now. The research site was in Japan, so that you can see how the foreigners living in Japan has been increasing as a percentage. And of course, as a result, the recent visa issues for foreigners in Japan is substantially increasing. You can see these figures. With respect to these things, we have to think about the Sri Lankan entrepreneurs in other countries, that, like you know, in India, Silicon Valley, the mostly overseas Indians invested in India and started the kind of a way to develop the country. So if you think about kind of micro foundation to macro development, we have to touch these immigrant entrepreneurs. I know very well in Japan, there are about 25,000 Sri Lankans in Japan. There are about 2,000 immigrant Sri Lankan entrepreneurs in Japan. About 2,000 Sri Lankan immigrant entrepreneurs in Japan. You might have heard that there is an organization called Samurai Japan. What is Samurai Japan? Samurai Japan is a used vehicle exporting organization where Sri Lankan 50 entrepreneurs got together and formulate a big foreign-born firm. So that, of course, is targeting the Australian market, where from the 2020, Australia are going to ban the vehicle production. They are going to import the vehicle production, all vehicles, because of the environmental regulations. So Japan will be the main supplier. I think these 50 Sri Lankan exporters got together, formulate this Samurai Japan company will work. So huge amount of money they have invested on that. So if you see the macro and micro foundation of migration, we know people migrate for employment purpose, training purpose, education purpose, business purpose, tourism, marriage purpose, and even refugees. So all these, of course, contribute to diaspora, which diaspora sometimes we can see the formulating immigrant entrepreneurship, where the immigrant entrepreneurship is essentially linking to management, business development, that part. So they usually go for their success and prospects and the possibilities for the creating the linkages between Sri Lanka and Japan. So all these I'm not going to explain. I think the time is the problem. So I will go to of course, this is the literature on entrepreneurship, how the immigrant entrepreneurship come into the literature. One of the important things I have to tell that the most economists in Sri Lanka also have forgotten doing research on entrepreneurship. Now new area is coming as economics of entrepreneurship. Since the 2000 onwards, the people are doing more research about whether the entrepreneurs are born or entrepreneurs are creative. Can we create entrepreneurs? So in that line, how do we think create entrepreneurs, because when we take 4 factors of production, most lacking factor in Sri Lanka is the entrepreneurship. The number of entrepreneurs are not sufficient in Sri Lanka. We know about, if we go to the total labor force survey, only 229,000 people are called employers in this country. Employers are only 229,000, so which means the rest of them all are employees. So the number of employers or entrepreneurs are not sufficient in Sri Lanka. And those who are in abroad also, I think we are not getting the exact linkages, what we call the relationships to the country. So therefore my research during last couple of years, because in 2006 I started doing research. I interviewed 100 Sri Lankan business entrepreneurs in Japan during the 2006, and in the 2016 I interviewed 315 Sri Lankan immigrant entrepreneurs in Japan. So this is one-to-one interview. So based on that, what I did, that you can see the study, the Sri Lankan entrepreneurs in Japan have gone from these areas. Mainly Japan, the Sri Lankan entrepreneurs are dominated by the southern province and of course the other provinces. So therefore this is one important thing. Other thing, in their location in Japan also different than other foreigners in Japan. That is 2016 figure. This is 6 figure. This is 2016 figure. The Sri Lankans are more towards the areas like you can see here, more towards the areas like Kanagawa or the port and airport areas, and they do a lot of vehicle related businesses and some other businesses. The time is the restriction. I will go to quickly. My hypothesis, the research hypothesis, there were 4 hypotheses I have constructed. The one is there is a significantly positive relationship between entrepreneurial success and prospects. The second, there is significantly direct relationship between entrepreneurial issues and success. Okay, so what I did that these things I tested with the 315 entrepreneurs using structural equation modeling, and then of course with the hypothesis testing. What I going to say finally, because of the time I'm not able to present all my things. The important thing that the Sri Lankans should get, especially the education or other things from Sri Lanka. That's one of the important factors. Because we believe that Sri Lankans are literate. 93% literacy according to our usual literacy definition. But if you go to the real definition of literacy today is different. What are our literacy definitions? And what I found that there are a lot of things you can read. The first one only I will elaborate. The literacy, when we come to, the literacy does not mean reading and writing ability in our language or other languages, which include today how many languages you can speak, how you can use the ICT skills, the financial literacy, and networking, and innovativeness, and the entrepreneurship. All 5 take as literacy today. So that we have checked with the Sri Lankan entrepreneurs, these are significant factors for their business success. So these are important things. So there are many things. Time doesn't allow me to do that. Anyway, thank you very much for inviting me to do this presentation. Thank you.